Hello and welcome. My name is Susan Hirata, and welcome to the 16th Annual DisOrient Asian American Film Festival. I'm the programming director for DisOrient, and it is my pleasure to host this Q&A for Water Like Fire, which is a beautiful, soulful indie film set on the island of Oahu. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our filmmakers. Today we have two people from the Water Like Fire team. We have writer-director Mitchel Viernes joining us from Honolulu. And we have writer Josiah Simpson joining us from Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Aloha, Susan. Thank you for having us. Seriously.
Yeah, great.
Thank you. It's great to be
Yeah.
here.
Thank you so much. Welcome to both of you. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me about your film. We are going to try to avoid spoilers, as some folks might not have watched the film yet. So just put that out there. We'll try. I think we can still do the film justice. Okay, so I'd like to start with this question, maybe to you, Josiah. You can start on this, and Mitchel, feel free to chime in. I wondered if you could talk about the seed or the initial spark for this story that you wrote that ultimately turned into this beautiful film.
Yeah, so the initial spark for this story happened when I was I catered for about 7 months, and one of the assistants that worked under me, she had a brother who was homeless, and I didn't realize this. There was one homeless guy that we would feed, that we would just make a plate for him anytime that he came by, and I let her know that that was the only guy that we were going to feed, because I wasn't sure about the rest of everyone else, and I worked near a school, so I didn't really want to attract anyone else there. But one day someone else came by that I didn't recognize, and she just went out and brought him a plate of food, and when she came back in, I was like, "Hey, who was that?" And she's like, "Oh, that's my brother." And I was like, "Wow." So I started asking about him, and I guess he used to be this big Samoan guy, and he used to play football, and he just got a really bad habit with meth, and it just kind of destroyed his life, and he lost all this weight, and lost his house, lost everything. And just from that initial scene that I saw, it evoked so much emotion. I was like, there's a story here, and it needs to be told. So that was just really just that moment. I think just that's all that story needed to get going. It's just insane how much depth there is in just a bond for a moment, you know.
Mm-hmm. And then you wrote it as a short film, or you wrote it as a story with no intention of it being a film?
Initially, I did write it as a shorter film, but once Mitchell and I sort of reviewed it a couple of times, he was like, "This needs to be a feature length because there's a lot here to unpack, and we just need to do every single scene justice and give every character the depth that they need, you know."
When we were going, when Josiah and I were going back and forth with the story, there was even points where at first I was like, if this is going to be a short, we have to shave some things off. And then when we decided it needed to be a feature, we reintroduced those scenes. I pitched to him some ideas of stuff, of scenes that I think would be good to add, that would have helped push the story even more to make it into a feature. And really, even before I read the first page of the screenplay he gave me, just the title alone evoked so much of a reaction out of me, just Water Like Fire. And when it got into this interesting duality between the siblings, obviously when you watch the film, Chanel, the sister, is represented by water, and Caleb and his destructive tendencies are rooted in fire, and kind of that being the main theme of how they, in their own different ways, dealt with grief. Finding that as a central theme of the film, how people dealt with grief, was instrumental in how we progressed with turning the story into a feature.
Yeah, it is such a poetic title, Water Like Fire, and it goes well with the beautiful film. So also I wanted to ask you about the themes of the film. It's kind of seems like a redemption story for Caleb in the end. This film, it's like you use this film to explore the heartbreaking, relevant issues of our time, including substance abuse, including houselessness, and just being distant from loved ones, unable to connect with loved ones. So I'm wondering what you drew on for this. Did you have, especially like the substance abuse, did you talk to counselors or people that deal with this, or how did you come about the details of that? And also I really like the way that you humanize not only addiction, but how you give this reminder that everybody has a backstory. It's such a empathetic story and compassionate story, just to show that we all have our backstories and how we got to where we are. So maybe if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Josiah, I hope you don't mind if I
go for it.
First, I knew immediately here in Hawaii, we do have a big houselessness issue, and a lot of people are houseless, whether by choice or whether by the circumstances they're dealt with. It's there, like you said, everyone has a different story, and within that, there is a lot of there is a big problem also with meth and substance abuse in the communities here. So I think there was a great opportunity to truly root it in the setting of here in Hawaii.
Yeah.
But like you mentioned, what really drew me to Josiah's script in the first place was how much he humanized Caleb's struggle and the demons that Caleb was working through. And it's so easy sometimes to, I feel, be an outsider and look at people who are suffering from houselessness or suffering from some kind of substance abuse, and look at it at a very much a black and white situation of something being inherently good, inherently bad. But there's actually a lot of gray area, and you don't understand what circumstances have led people to go down a certain path. And coming back to the core theme of how people deal with grief, that was the main heart of it. Chanel is someone who moved through her grief, and Caleb avoided and tried to move around his grief by turning towards other things that could help ease his pain. Josiah, do you want to chime in on whether?
So one thing I've definitely noticed, especially with people who did not grow up in Hawaii, they sort of have this image in their mind of what life is like there, and I would say most media that I see on Hawaii on the TV and shows and movies just showcases the very positive, very vibrant tropical, like the very positive parts of Hawaiian culture, and it just doesn't really it doesn't really show the darker parts of what goes on especially the island I grew up on, but all of Hawaii as a whole. And yeah, I just really wanted to shed some light on those things, and how even in paradise, there's still quite a few people that really are living in a sort of hellscape, and it's not really paradise for them. But also, not to, I also didn't want to depict them in a way that separates them from the rest of society as a human. I wanted to show that, like you said, we all have a backstory, and we can't really know what one person has been through in their life, and we all have very difficult struggles at some point in our life, and some of those struggles, especially homelessness and drug abuse in Hawaii, are very prevalent, and I don't believe they're any better or worse than, some mental struggles or physical struggles that people have. They're just different, and they need to be brought to the forefront. They need to be talked about, and we need to feel safe about talking about those things so that we can resolve those issues.
Yeah, I think, and this is a great way when you humanize the issue. It's like the step towards society really putting more effort towards bettering the situations for everyone. And I think the film also shows how everyone just wants to have connection, particularly with the people they love, which can be so difficult sometimes, but it's this human yearning for connection with others. And especially as a film in this time where we're all a little not connected, at least physically, with each other, it's very timely, showing the importance of connection and of family and community.
I know when you talk about like research and consultants, I know a big thing that Josiah explained to me at the start was how there's been scientific studies of like mice in labs with water that's laced with drugs and water that isn't. And when there's a community of mice, they'll never go towards the drug water, but a mouse in isolation will. And that's relative to anyone who's dealing with substance abuse. So especially when we played around with, and people will see this when they watch the movie, we kind of played around with the structure of how we told the story. And I think that kind of shone through, and we really wanted to show that big contrast between intercutting between scenes where you see Chanel has a support group. She has a great group of people that she can depend on. And that's completely juxtaposed with Caleb in harsh isolation, and not having anyone to turn to or lean on. And then as the film also progresses, you see a change in that as well. And how having community is something that having genuine community allows us to flourish, I think.
And I think oddly enough, in terms of, I don't remember the word that you used, consultants, that's right. In terms of consultants, I didn't necessarily sit down with anyone in particular, but I feel like the community itself just gave me the story, which is, it's kind of, I just felt blessed to be the person who was there at that moment to just receive that sort of story and be able to show it to the rest of the world. And even though they're not the only influence on this, I've spoken to many homeless people and many people with addiction issues. They may not realize that they were the community that initially built this film. And it's just, I don't think they know how powerful their stories can be, and hopefully through this film they can realize that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I do think that's one of the powerful aspects of storytelling, and especially through film, is being able to convey these kind of stories that people can relate to, who are going through a similar situation. And when you're able to see your story realized, whether that's through film or any kind of other medium of art, it really helps you feel less alone, and
Yeah.
that burden you're understood. So
It's a kind of a healing. It can be a kind of healing to see your story being told, like you're not the only one.
mhm.
And that's also, I think, one of the reasons why we decided that we didn't want the film to be too flashy, if that makes sense. We wanted it to be a story that you could actually see happening. And it's a story that could very well be happening to someone right now, or something very similar.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Mitchell, maybe you can talk a little bit about this story in the context of Hawaii. You mentioned a little bit about
Mhm.
Hawaii, but that it's not necessarily all the tropical paradise that the media leads you to believe. But you tell this universal story of love, loss, and grief, but it's through this specific lens of Hawaii. It's just the film is infused with the place of Hawaii, the spirit of Hawaii, and I love that it's this Hawaii film, but it's also just this universal story. It could have been anywhere, but it's definitely Hawaii. And also, if you can speak to my favorite scene is the Kanikapila scene. I think it just is powerful and grounds the movie really, like this is Hawaii when you see that scene in particular. Even more than the ocean, even for me, that just feels
Mhm.
like that should be part of this story of healing. So can you talk about that, making a film in Hawaii?
Yeah, I know Josiah touched on it a little bit in that, trying to step away from the mainstream media's portrayal of Hawaii being the idyllic paradise where, I mean, granted, we do have rainbows that are like appearing every single day, but there's so much more. And I think the best stories that anyone can tell, any filmmaker can tell, is when you tell it um, authentically, and when you're genuine about it. So I knew, for me, being someone born and raised here in Hawaii, having my entire family is here for generations. That's where my voice can come through, and telling it as a Hawaii story. Although it's like you said, it's universal. Telling it as a Hawaii story is what is the best way that I could tell the story in a genuine and authentic way, to be truthful. And so, for those who may not know, like Kanikapila, I guess the equivalent phrase, like on the continent, would be like a jam session. But here in Hawaii, there's the scene in the film where Chanel is really at a crossroads, wondering what she should do, and she sees this Kanikapila session with these construction worker uncles in this beach parking lot. Music is such a healing and uniting power in Hawaiian culture. And a scene like I've actually, just been places where you'll see that here in Hawaii, people just doing that. And I really felt that when I visualized that scene happening, I knew it would be so essential, because there's nowhere else in the world I feel you'll be able to see something like that. So really, at this height, this very big point in the movie where our protagonist is working through a lot of things, for that to be the catalyst for her to understand what her next step is and where the story needs to lead. I thought it was, as you said, it was a very local and Hawaii centered answer to her question, what she needed in that moment. And I'm glad you love it, because it's one of my favorite scenes.
Oh, I tell you, it made me cry, because just, the time I was watching the film and then seeing this scene, it was just so beautiful, and just like such a prayer given out in this movie, kind of, it felt like that. It felt healing like that. Yeah. So talking about Hawaii, I also think that Hawaii is doing such a great job of grooming their filmmakers, their young filmmakers. We have gotten so many really strong films coming from Hawaii filmmakers, and such young ones like you are so young. I can't believe that you have pulled off this amazing film. But I'm wondering if you could talk about that. What is it like now at this time being a young filmmaker in Hawaii and getting that support, getting to tell Hawaii stories, why it's important that Hawaii tells its own stories, why it's important for a culture to tell its own stories, especially cultures that have been erased, how important it is to have good storytellers. Maybe if you could talk about that a little.
Yeah, of course. I consider myself personally to be I'm so grateful, and I feel so privileged to be able to be a filmmaker in this time in Hawaii, because Hawaii, there's been films made in Hawaii. Local people have made films for years, but at least in the past 5-6 years or so, there's been a huge uptick in it. And there's been as you said, there's been a big wave of filmmakers that have been coming in. And really, honestly, there's such a great and amazing support system here in Hawaii to help foster those talents. There's a Hawaii Filmmakers Collective, which is where I first started connecting with other people here in Hawaii in the industry and in the community. You've got Pacific Islanders in Communications, Ohina. There's a creative lab that goes on here. There's so many amazing resources to help foster the talent here. And the community itself also is really like a family. There's so many other local filmmakers who, one of the early test screenings for Water Like Fire, I just invited a bunch of my other friends who are local filmmakers, and we sat down. They were able to give me really, really great feedback, and to have a safe space like that where they can be critical but also constructive, and we can talk things out. I'm like, I don't mean to sound like a broken record. I feel so blessed because there's so much amazing things happening. And I think we touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think it is important. There's an aspect of cultures telling their own stories to, so that way other people who are in that culture feel their stories are heard, feel like it's out there in the world. But I also feel that the importance in it comes from when we put our own stories forward, and when we can consume stories from other cultures outside of our own, when we're able to get perspective of someone else's, the lens through which they view the world, through their culture, spiritual beliefs, whatever it is, it's only beneficial for us as humans, to connect, to empathize, to understand other people. It's so uniting.
Yeah.
So I think that's why it's so great that there are more local and even more important than local, truly native stories being told. There's so many Kanaka Maoli filmmakers who are making amazing stuff right now.
Mhm.
Josiah, did you want to touch on the importance of how you feel that's important at all?
Well, I'll talk about so I was there for a couple of the audition. Oh, I'm sorry, hang on, my video just closed for a second there. Okay. Sorry about that. So I got to see some of the auditions, video auditions, and I got to be there for a couple of them. I knew there was some hidden talent in Hawaii, but I had no idea just how incredible the hidden were until I saw these auditions, and just I'm so glad that there's just a local community that's able to showcase Hawaiian stories like this from a non-Hollywood perspective.
Yeah, your two leads were incredible.
What was your question?
I was just saying your two leads were incredible, Mitchell, in really carrying that film. Also, I wanted to mention in our program we have a short animation called Where Smoke Rises. And it's in Olelo, Hawaii. And I think a lot of people on the mainland don't even know that there's a Hawaiian language and that it is alive and spoken in Hawaii, which is, so that in itself is amazing to see on film and be able to hear it.
Absolutely, because it's such a beautiful language, and there's been a rise in Olelo Hawaii speakers recently as well. Even people who aren't Kanaka Maoli, there's been people, just local people, who have made the effort to learn the language, and it's really inspiring to see like it coming back from almost the brink of extinction.
Because there's a lot in culture is in your language. Your language carries so much of your culture, and when you don't have it, you lose so much of that culture. Yeah. So I was wondering if you both, what do you have coming up? What projects are you working on next? Do you have anything happening?
I know Josiah and I haven't really, we talk all the time. We don't really have any film projects that he and I are directly collaborating on at the moment, but I have some things in development that I'm working on with some local film groups here, and I'm kind of delving into a different genre. I'm kind of exploring horror through a Hawaiian cultural lens a little bit. So that's kind of exciting.
That is exciting.
Yeah.
How about you, Josiah? Are you writing a lot?
At the moment, I'm sort of drifting away from script writing, although I do want to get back to it. I'm working on a novel right now. I'm also kind of getting a little bit into some amateur voice acting, which has been very interesting. So,
wow, that's really cool. Yeah, cool. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention about your film before we end the Q&A?
Just that I hope that there's a lot that people can take away from the film, and I hope that they leave feeling feeling a sense of healing, a sense of wanting to go out and be a good force and reach out to those less fortunate, and appreciate the connections that they do have. It was such a privilege to make this film, and has such a deep place in my heart forever now.
Yeah, well, we love having it in our program, and thanks so much to both of you for chatting with us about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks.